And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And I will give you all the great information as we move through our program because I love getting right to our guest who is joining us all the way from, did you say Oregon? Is that right, Sarah Peyton?
Vancouver, Washington, right across the Columbia River.
Seattle,
Portland,
Seattle.
Oregon.
Okay, there. Well, it's close enough. Close enough for living in the forest. Which wouldn't be a bad thing these days, except for all the silly fires and things of that nature. And I thank you so much for being with us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Me too.
You are going to be sharing with us here on the program today about the work that you are doing through. I want to say it's a series of books, but it's actually more than that, and it's actually a program, if you will, a concept. And I found it very interesting, specifically because of the one word that's used. And you're promoting here, if you will, talking about your resonant self. And resonance is resonant. That has to do more with vibration, right?
Well, it's kind of like, I like to use the metaphor of a cello. I have a cello here in the background.
Excellent.
When you play one cello and you have another cello close by, it vibrates. It's got the same like resonant vibration
yes.
with the cello that's being played. And our human bodies actually do the same thing with each other. We really respond to each other. We can see in brain maps and fMRIs that when we're kind of tuning into somebody else, our brain starts to do the same thing that their brain is doing, even to the point of finishing their sentences before they finish them. We can see it.
Is there another word that can be used, like an empath, to be empathic? Or is that, do you think, something a little different?
Well, with the word empath, people are often talking about like kind of being born to be resonant. But my sense is that we are all resonant beings, that there's not somebody who's more resonant than another being, that it's a matter of kind of learning what is that brain space where if we actually respond with warmth and understanding that another person's body and being relaxed and trauma is healed, then all kinds of wonderful things happen for the immune system.
Well, first things first, let's talk a little bit about how you got started in all this. You apparently believe very strongly in the power of resonance to change the world. I feel as though in order to do that, we have to strike one giant tuning fork and just bang it against the ground and let it vibrate out, kind of even like the crystal bowls and things of this nature, and let that just permeate the planet and its people. I
love that.
Yeah. How did you come across this concept, if you will, and I know it's more than that, of resonance?
Well, I think the place it started for me was with nonviolent communication. And I'm a certified trainer of nonviolent communication now because it was such a revelation to me. I had the experience of being really stuck. I really wanted to hug my adopted son and I could not figure out how to hug him. My body would just stop. And I was like, oh, this sucks. And I couldn't imagine that anything would change. I'd never had anything change in my life. And I just happened to go to a nonviolent communication retreat with Marshall Rosenberg, the fellow who developed nonviolent communication. And they said, there's going to be an empathy circle. They called it an empathy circle. So I went to the empathy circle and so they said, who has an issue? Even if you think it won't change, let's talk about it. So I said, well, heck, I'm going to talk about my son. So I started talking about it and people, instead of telling me what to do or telling me to do something differently or think about it differently, they were just like really trying to understand me with a lot of warmth. And I had this spontaneous memory of being a little tiny girl and reaching out to hug my mom and feeling her body tighten. My mama she was a lovely woman and she had a lot of trauma. So her body tended to like panic when you reached for her. And once I got that, I was like, well, no wonder I have a hard time reaching out to hug people I love. I think that it's going to be harmful to them. And when I let that go, I could hug my son. And I was like, okay, that was really weird. What the heck happened? How do we explain this? And that was the beginning of me investigating relational neuroscience and the way that we use language with each other that actually allows the brain to change in profound ways.
Oh, I have to say that what you are going to share with us in this program is going to be fascinating, especially, and this is one of the things that I will be mentioning throughout the program to our listeners that I have been promoting since September of 2019. It started out with people being encouraged to participate in the Year of Perfect Vision,
Mm.
2020. And then when that year ended, we went on to the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s, encouraging people to go within, to
Mhm.
listen to that still small voice, and to be in that quiet, peaceful, calm space within and relax and rejuvenate. However, what I found interesting from you was that your still small voice was kind of mean, and of course, there's
Yes,
a
it's
section
true.
in on your website about this. Do you have a critical inner voice? Now, before I read the rest of this, is that critical inner voice different from the still small voice that our intuition?
Well, I think, it ends up, once we clear the trauma, it ends up being the same voice. But I think there's sort of this period of time where we've got the default mode network, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about this still voice within. The default mode network actually changes for everybody throughout the day. So you might wake up depressed and go to sleep happy, or wake up happy and go to sleep depressed, and have these kinds of daily rhythms of the way the voice treats you and what things are difficult and what aren't. And if you make a mistake, my God, what happens then? So, so as we heal trauma and as we make our brains a kinder, gentler place to live,
Yeah,
then
kinder,
yeah,
gentler, you betcha.
kinder, gentler, yeah. Then what happens is that voice becomes that voice really starts to rock in terms of being a supportive, sweet center voice of intuition and warmth and self-warmth.
Very interesting. I have to tell you that of late, with what I have been going through in my own personal life, and this is one of the things that I was constantly being shared with by people who were supporting me as I would go through this period, was be kind to yourself. Take care of yourself. Focus
Yeah.
on yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't care about anybody else. Has nothing to
No.
do with that. Because if you're kinder to yourself, Richard, if you take care of yourself, Richard, then you will be there for others as well, the immediate people around you and so forth.
Yes.
And that seems to me like the survival rule. Take care of number one, or on the airplane, put your mask on first before you
Yeah.
help anybody else.
Yes, it's a very interesting concept because it immediately takes us into this idea, okay, am I being selfish? If
Yep.
I actually focus on myself, am I being selfish? And no, and people actually really truly deeply want to be able to contribute to the world.
Yeah.
It's one of our greatest desires is to have our presence be a contribution, to be able to contribute. And the thing that stops people from contributing more than anything else is unhealed trauma, because that's what sends that default mode network into the whirlpool of self-criticism, and that gets in the way of contribution.
Right. You're listening to Tell Me Your Story. We're talking with Sarah Peyton, and she has a website by the same name with a .com at the end there. And we will be linked to your website as well, Sarah, so that people can
Thank
find
you,
out more
Richard.
about DMN, ladies and gentlemen. Hope that you will go there and check that out. I'm Richard Dugan, and my guest is Sarah Peyton, and we are talking about DMN. Okay, that's the Default Mode Network. I think that's how that's put together.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
talk about how truth, not trauma, understanding relational trauma and the brain. Now,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, first of all, whose dog is this on your website? That is one gorgeous. Am I correct? Siberian Husky?
um, there are, I think, a couple of dogs on the website, and I just love dogs, so they are.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful,
Dogs I
beautiful.
love.
But one of the things that, and I'm going to be sharing obviously a little bit of my own personal story, at least in a general sense.
Okay.
Names have been changed or omitted because I'm not out to shame anybody, to make anybody
No.
the bad guy or bad girl, whichever the case may be. But one of the things that I have found is that as I am going through my processes, trying to get through it, there is all for me. There's seems like there's this undercurrent for me of I'm going to call it optimism.
Oh,
Okay, now when the pandemic was declared, and certainly there was a moment of anxiety and all of that kind of stuff, but underneath there, and I've shared this many times on this program in the last year or two, I thought, this is great. We're doing something different. We're no longer practicing insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. For example, when the flu rolls around, I've been telling people for 40 years plus, we need to shut the airlines down, stop people from moving around for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, they would
mm,
say, oh no, you can't do that, will devastate our economy. And now today I'm going, really? As compared to what we've just been through, 2 weeks is a blip. Okay?
yeah,
So
yeah.
we finally said we're going to do something different. Now, we don't know what it's going to look like on the other end. All right? We may or may not like it, but it's going to be different. But the optimism was in what opportunities are
Mm,
we going to have available to us as we go through and come out the other side. Okay? So, as I deal with the situations in my personal life, I feel the same way. I'm thinking, look, first of all, this is temporary. This is not a permanent state
mm.
any more than my life is permanent. I mean, I would like to hang around for another 40 plus years. I often tell people, look, I have to outlive my great grandmother who lived to be 100. All right, I'm
Oh,
61. So that kind of tells you I got another lifetime or two,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
So for me, that's there. Okay. And I'm not ignoring the realities. I live here in California, and you know as well as I do, you've heard the reports, and even you there in Oregon and Washington, you've had your share of fires too.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that they are devastating to people. But I remember when we were evacuated the one time, believe it or not, with all of the fires that I've dealt with since 2006, we were only evacuated once. Now, I didn't want this to happen, but I was sort of preparing myself for it. If the fire takes
Yeah.
out the cottage, okay, then we don't have anything to move. Now, we don't have anything other than the clothes on our back and whatever we had in the car, plus our animals.
Mhm.
Okay. So guess what? We get to start over. We get a fresh start and new opportunities and new experiences. I mean, I loved the concept of staycation. We stayed at 3 different hotels for 10 days and then a friend's house for the last 2 days. We would have never gone to those hotels. I could write Yelp reviews
Yeah,
on these hotels, right?
Here's a question for you.
Sure.
Do you have a sense that either your mom or your dad had this lovely sort of unsinkable optimism?
You know, I'll be honest with you, I would say so. And I will
Yeah.
tell you why. Many
Hmm.
people ask me, so what, or they say to me, your parents must have sacrificed a lot because they had 6 of you. I've got 2 older sisters, 2 younger sisters, and a younger brother. And I remember having my parents on this program. I've interviewed them. Now, the interview isn't
Mm.
available yet because they're still alive. My dad's 90, my mother 87. They've been married 65 years. And I asked them that very question. Did you sacrifice anything
Interesting.
in to have such a big family? And my mom and dad both agree, saying, no, we wanted a big family. There
So
was
part of
no,
what you're describing with this unsinkable
yeah,
optimism is something that comes as a gift
yeah.
from parents who are securely attached, who have a sense of optimism and give it to their children.
Oh,
It's a very sweet gift. It's really important for health and well-being and post-traumatic growth and being able to make our way through a difficult world. And what the nice thing is that if our parents didn't have it and didn't give it to us, then it still starts to surface as we do the healing work for the brain.
Yeah, it's, and I have to say, I'm grateful. You know, I mean, we went on a number of vacations. We would go up north to Flagstaff. I was born and raised in Phoenix.
Mm,
We would actually come to California. We went to San Diego a couple times. I remember the first time we came here on a vacation, they had rented for a week an apartment that
mm,
overlooked the beach at Huntington. I believe it was
mm,
Huntington Beach. Might have been.
uh,
No, I think it was, well, San Diego. That's not Huntington. Anyway, it was a fabulous experience. It was wonderful. Went to
yeah.
SeaWorld and then we went up to Disneyland and da 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 da.
Mm,
But they even with the children, including myself, who had visual impairments, so
mm,
they had to deal with these challenges with the glasses. I know that a couple of my sisters did get braces.
mm.
I had the choice at the age of 21 when they yanked out my wisdom teeth, all four of them at once. You know, we can get those straightened out if you wear braces. And I was so self-conscious back at the age of 21. I said, no, no, I'll be okay. I'll be fine. And now today I'm sitting here going, I wish I'd made the other decision because I think things might be different, maybe not. But anyway, this is fascinating stuff. How to build inner resonant, inner resonance. That's right. How to build an inner resonance. Sarah Peyton, my guest on the Therapy Chat podcast. You have your own podcast as well. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh, I was on somebody else's podcast, on the
Okay.
Therapy Chat podcast. Yeah, getting to talk
So
about
you are a guest on on a number of them, including ours.
that.
You also have guided meditations to
Yeah, those are
transform
for
your
free
brain with
download on the
self.
website.
I beg on your website, right?
Yeah.
And that website, of course, is sarahpeyton.com. And we encourage folks to go there. That's, by the way,
Yeah.
SARAHPEYTON.com. And we encourage you to go there. One of the other aspects that I'd love to talk to you about in this context, especially now in what I call the COVID era.
Hmm.
Again, an era only lasts a certain length of time. You don't always know how long it'll be, but it only lasts a certain length of time. And that is to how to heal. And I want to speak, I saw the word and I thought it said something else, but I'm glad I brought it up.
Mm.
You have here how to heal guilt and shame with resonance, but the word I thought it was grief. I want to talk about
Oh,
grief
yeah. Oh, let's talk about grief.
because a lot of people are having a lot of trouble these days. Not only if they have lost a loved one due to the pandemic, or for any other reason that for that matter, but those like myself who can't point to anyone that I have lost, but I have had, let's see, I've had a sister and her husband and kids, her adult children, uh, come down with the virus, but they made it through, and I would say that their immune systems were very strong, so that helped. Did not have to go to the hospital. My parents were, as far as I know, they were perfectly safe from it. They stayed sequestered. I was actually going to visit them the summer of 2020, and they said, no. And I said, that's wise because I don't want to be responsible in that regard for that.
No.
But yet, those of us who haven't suffered any kind of real loss, I have been working straight through the pandemic. Okay. For me,
Mhm.
my life hasn't really changed that much. Yet, you talk about this whole aspect of resonance, and I can feel that sort of vibration of angst and grief,
Mhm.
maybe over people losing their jobs, losing loved ones, losing one thing and another. Talk to us a little bit about that because they say that we are headed towards another pandemic, but that pandemic is a mental health pandemic, especially in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really taking a hit because one of the things that's true about us in this country is that we don't have any kind of real modeling of self-warmth and self-compassion. You were talking about how when you first started out, people were like, you have to take care of yourself. People always say that, be nice to yourself, but they don't say how to do it.
Uh huh.
It's like there's some technology here for self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
And there's some research that shows us some really sweet ways to start to do it. And one of the things that's really important to begin to understand is that we have different circuits that take care of us in different ways. And one of our circuits is our seeking circuit. And a seeking circuit gets things done. But the seeking circuit does not have any neurobiology that takes us into warmth. The seeking circuit is dopamine. It's not a cuddly circuit. It's not a I love you circuit. It's a let's get this done circuit. And then we have a care circuit, which is a really cuddly circuit that runs on oxytocin, runs on endogenous opioids. And the care circuit can be this incredible sweetness for us. So it's very interesting to begin to notice that when people say self-care, they'll like give you a list of all of the little things you're supposed to do for self-care. Take a bubble bath, or make yourself healthy food, have a pot of soup, sit down and rest, all these things that you do that you could check off on a checklist. But none of the things on the list are like, just for a minute, breathe and love yourself. Just be kind and warm and put imaginary arms around yourself and say, oh my God, Sarah, of course you're having a hard time. Of course this pandemic is kicking your butt. Of course you need some warmth and care and tenderness. And that's something that doesn't get modeled. And without that, then we do all kinds of things to try to take care of ourselves that don't work particularly well. Things like alcohol and opioids and marijuana and all of the things that are sort of really effective in changing the internal brain chemistry temporarily, but don't take that moment of warmth and love and sweetness and self-compassion. Now, if we've had a lot of trauma, warmth and self-compassion can be untrustworthy. Even with ourselves, we can go, that's not authentic. I don't want to have anything that's not authentic. And then there's this whole other sort of healing journey that we're on of acknowledging the impact of trauma so that we can get to the point of having the self-warmth.
Sarah Peyton, my guest here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you for staying with us here on the program as we continue our conversation and talk about the work that she is doing, our guest Sarah Peyton, on the internet. You can find her at sarahpeyton.com, and that's Peyton. We certainly hope that you will investigate the work that she is doing. She has a wonderful series of books. Actually, they kind of all go together here in a program that she has designed, and it is called Your Resonant Self. There's also a workbook, and it's two books, one inseparable whole. And her first book, Your Resonant Self, includes the fundamental neuroscience concepts and clinical and client stories that help the reader pave a resonant participant practice path to self-compassion. Now, one of the things that I have heard, Sarah, is that there are, as you've actually already alluded to, that there are a lot of different ways to, take care of self.
Yeah.
And to sort of rewire the brain or rewrite the neural pathways, the neural net, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I have learned of two in particular. One is the type of music one might listen to. Classical music in particular. I remember doing some research on what's called the Mozart effect. And I researched that and, I got the information. And then I saw another article poo-pooing it. But what my first question was, if I could ever find the person, if I could find out who it was that actually decided to do that study on Mozart's music, I'd say, why Mozart? Why not Bach, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, et cetera, et cetera? Right. There's another method that I learned of from another good programmer, a good guest who has been on my program, Swami Vidyadishananda of the Self-Inquiry Life Fellowship. It has a monastery here in Montecito, California. And he talked about how in England, They are teaching students how to write Sanskrit. They're not trying to resurrect the language, but the process of learning the Sanskrit language as they learn to write and understand it also rewrites the neural net.
Oh,
Now,
that's beautiful.
I'm thinking that it isn't so much the music or the writing of this ancient language, this ancient text, if you will. It's more when you do something that is different from what you've ever done before in more of a creative, constructive way for self. Is that a better way to phrase that than saying, yes, you need to listen to Mozart, and yes, you need to learn how to write Sanskrit?
I think so. Because, different things open in different ways for different people. And different generations have different takes on music as well. Sometimes, what's most important is rap music, and sometimes what's most important is classical music. And we simply cannot prefer one over the other. We get to actually look at the effect that music in general has on brains. It's a very good effect. And anything that we do that kind of takes us from the body into an experience of being alive has a great deal of sweetness. One of my favorite neuroscientists is Ruth Lanius, who does all kinds of research into PTSD and the effects of PTSD on the brain. And what we can see in a PTSD brain, post-traumatic stress disorder, we can see that the trauma affects the default mode network in a visible way. So we were talking about the critical voice, the critical inner voice. The critical inner voice is actually a visible set of energy movement in the brain that we can see. And then she did fMRI studies of people after they'd done trauma treatment, and she could see that their default mode network had changed the way it was routing itself through the brain. So she talks about the importance of top-down work, where you and I are doing top-down work. For the folks who are listening, we're giving them cognition. And as they're kind of tuning into us, they might be getting some juicy bits of resonance and connection. And they know you and they know your story, and they get to hear different parts of it as you talk to different guests. And that's all part of like a kind of a relational and top-down kind of work with the brain. But everything that we do, that we give thought to and care for and explore with resonance, with warm understanding, takes us from the bottom up. So writing Sanskrit allows people to be in their bodies experiencing something coherent and integrative. One of the things that we've been experimenting with on the website and in my community is offering classes to do writing and to do collage and to do art, different kinds of art, and to sing and to explore that, like, what's it like to step into creativity and have warm understanding for ourselves, whatever it is that comes up, whatever kinds of trauma remnants need to be held with care, whatever fears, whatever self-criticism needs to be held with care, so that we can move through the blocks and start to experience the expression that I'm sure is a part of the writing of Sanskrit, such a beautiful language.
I know nothing of it in that respect. I'm familiar with some words because of my diving into, at the age of 17, autobiography of a yogi. And of course, a lot of Sanskrit words were used, words in Hindu and so on and so forth. And I just find it utterly fascinating how languages even developed. I'm sure that there's coursework on that aspect of how languages are created. It's again, I think it's unbelievable how this stuff happens. I mean, from my perspective, it's like, wow. I mean, how did you? And then the different languages, and there are some languages that I like more than others. By the way, I understand you can speak Russian. You speak Russian
I
very well. You
do.
used to translate on a fishing boat, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. That's exactly right. I
I
just was teaching this morning. I have a Russian certification program for people in Russia who've been studying my work and using it with clients who I was just working with them this morning. So I was doing my best effort to speak Russian all morning.
One of the things that I learned about Russian, and of course, this was more of a derivative, if you will, of Russian. My first wife's family, or her father's family, was raised in Russia. As a matter of fact, her grandfather, her father's father, left the Soviet Union the night before the Bolshevik Revolution.
Oh, that's very good
Yeah,
timing.
yeah, that's not bad, not bad. If he hadn't, probably his son nor his granddaughter would have been born. But
Yeah.
I learned that in Russian, at least when I was this was being shared with me, there is only one word. They don't have, for example, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm looking to learn here too. They don't have a word for, let's say, car or washing machine. They have one word for machine. Unless these new words, like they have in English, have been created
Yeah.
and put into their dictionary.
Yeah.
And it is very fascinating. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I really loved was learning some of the phrases around Easter, for example, when
Mm,
you're celebrating the resurrection. One of the phrases that you would greet someone with, and then they would respond, similar to in Islam, is Christos voskres. And you'd respond,
yeah.
Voyastenos voskres. Christ is
Yeah.
risen. Indeed, he is risen.
Indeed, he is risen.
And I remember that's one of the phrases. I love the food, pasca in particular, and which is a bread. Oh my God, a great sweet bread. My mother-in-law, and she would put little
Oh,
crosses and little designs with the dough on top before she baked it. Oh, it was fabulous.
mm.
In any event, it's. I'm curious as to how you're learning Russian, or period, another language. Let's be more general in that respect.
Sure.
Has maybe helped you in terms of how do we put this, rewriting, if you will, the neural pathways in your brain. What is that? One of the modalities that you have found has done that, even if you didn't know that was what was going on at the time.
I think so. I mean, it really gives you a sense, especially if you learn a second language as a young person or a relatively young person, it gives you almost a different identity. Like I've noticed that when I'm speaking Russian, I'm less easy to shame. I'm very easy to shame in English. I'm very highly trained in shame in the English language, but in the Russian language, I'm a little bit fearless. And that may be from having spent some years as a young woman on Russian fishing boats. I mean, you sort of have to be somewhat fearless in the Bering Sea.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. How did
Yeah.
you wind up on Russian fishing boats in the Bering Sea? That is
So,
fascinating
yeah,
stuff.
it is. Yeah, it's where I met my husband, which so I'm very grateful. The U.S. and the former Soviet Union had a joint venture fishing company, and what they would do is the U.S. fishing boats would catch the fish in U.S. waters and deliver the catch at sea to Russian fish processors. And I would live on the Russian fish processors, and I would translate between the American fishing boats and the Russian fish processors and track the production of fish for the company. So I was a company representative on the Russian fish processors.
Wow. By the
Yeah.
way, just let our listeners know who are not watching our YouTube video that we encourage new guests during our broadcast, our podcast video cast, and we just saw the tail of a black cat go by.
Oh yeah.
What's your cat's name?
This cat is Momo.
Momo. Well,
Yeah.
Momo, it's wonderful to have you on the program.
Oh,
This
thank
is Tell
you.
Me Your Story New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we are here talking with Sarah Peyton, sarahpeyton.com. And of course, we will be linked to her website so that you can search out more of what she does and maybe connect with her to do some work. You actually do one on one types of work, and obviously, these days, at least for the time being, it is obviously virtual.
Yes, yes. And
How
many people study with me, and there are references to people who study with me on the website as well
and
to be
again,
able
it's
to.
all about resonance.
It is. It's all about resonance. Resonance for our present day selves, resonance for our past selves, because in every experience of trauma, in every difficult memory that does not go away, there is a frozen seed of helplessness and of bewilderment and of many emotions happening at once. And we need to kind of do time travel to these past parts of ourself that are stuck in different places, doing different things with old ideas that aren't serving us anymore, and begin to reclaim all of our past selves.
Now I'm going to make it real complicated. What is your perspective? What is your perspective when it comes to past traumas from past lives?
There's really no difference for the healing work. The healing work is identical. We've done marvelous things for folks who had a sense of their trauma being from a previous life.
Hmm.
Marvelous things that relaxed the body and started people moving towards healing.
Well, I just am blown away by the work that you are doing. I think that it's really, really fascinating to look at. We're talking with Sarah Peyton, and I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And I would like to talk to you a little bit more about this program. First of all, obviously, we can go to your website, start there. We can connect with you. You've got
Yeah.
contact information and all that good stuff. We've done that. Okay, I've connected with you.
Hmm.
Now what? Where do I have to be? So to
Well,
speak, in what state, so in a manner of speaking? I don't mean state physically, not logistically,
uh-huh.
but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in
Well,
terms of saying, you know what, I'd really, you know, see, my perspective is I'm not broken. I don't need to be fixed, okay? However, I'm always saying on this program, there's always room for improvement. I am perfect
hmm.
by virtue of the fact that I just am. To
Yes,
be in this moment right now is perfection.
it
And
is.
you are perfect
Thank
being right now in this moment. But again, there's always room for improvement. And again, we're dealing with the traumas and so forth.
you. Yeah.
And I
I think,
loved what you said earlier about how it's so easy for you to be shamed in English, but not so much in Russian. Gee, I wish I knew another language myself, because I can kind of feel that. And I get so tired of hearing those kinds of comments from people,
mm,
especially people who say they love me,
mhm.
that kind of thing. That's what really, I would say that's what really hurts is this person says they love me, and yet then they say all this other stuff in other states, in other
Yeah, yeah,
consciousnesses, if you will.
yeah.
So where do we, with you, Sarah, where do we begin?
Well, with any kind of spark of curiosity, that's the very most fun thing about human brains is that they'll get like little wake up calls and they'll go, I wonder what it would be like to experience the yummy self warmth that Sarah's describing. Maybe that would be fun. Or maybe that makes me feel totally claustrophobic, which is really interesting. What will Sarah say about that? And to begin to discover, to start with the free guided meditations, for goodness sake. And then, if you like the free guided meditations, to get the book and look at the book and take a look and start to do the exercises or the journaling in the workbook. The workbook adds this whole dimension of what are the really good reasons that we do self sabotaging behaviors. Like one of our self sabotaging behaviors is letting ourselves believe that other people are saying something true about us.
Mm.
I remember as you were talking about how people say they love us and then they can say stuff that like totally takes us offline. I was remembering my mom. my sweet mama, who really, really, really wanted me to be tiny thin. And so when she saw me, she would say, "Sarah, you're fat," which would just devastate me for the first for all
Ooh.
of my life until I found a group of people who were like, "Oh yeah, that would be hard." Instead of telling me, just say this to your mom instead, or just do this, or think about it this way, instead of giving me advice, they were like, "Oh yeah, I wonder if you're devastated." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I am a little devastated." And finally one day my mom said to me, "Sarah, you're fat." And I said, I had had enough support by then that it didn't seem like a true thing that she was saying about me anymore. And I was like, "Mom, when you say that, I wonder if you're telling me that you really want people to love me, that you really want me to be safe and cared about in the world and respected. Is that what you want?" And she said, "Yes." And then
Okay.
and then it was a year and a half before she told me that I was fat again. And I made another guess. And she was just so calm about my body for the rest of my life, which was another 2.5 or 3 years by that point.
Wow.
And yeah.
Wow.
And so it's like there's this whole world of like what are the resonant things that people are trying to get across in their very tragic ways when they're trying to say I love you,
Yeah.
and it comes out in such difficult language.
Why can't you say what I just said you're probably trying to say instead of what you said? Why can't you just be I it's fascinating to me how men in particular, fathers in particular, husbands in particular, have such a hard time saying I love you. My
Oh,
father, every time I talk with him on the phone, he tells me, as does my mother, I love you. And I shared this once before on this program, and I'll share it again here. I remember when I was visiting my parents, and we were saying our goodbyes, and I was giving my mom a hug, and I said, I love you, Mom. And she said something to me that at first it took me aback just a little bit. And then I got to thinking about it, and I realized, ooh, I like that. She said, I love you too, son. She used the word son instead of my name. And I thought, wow, okay, I like that. It's I haven't really dissected it or unpacked it. It's just I just like it, you know. One of the other aspects that we have to deal with in our world these days, Sarah, is you kind of alluded to it earlier in the program. All of these different substances. And
yeah.
sometimes it's not a substance, sometimes it's a place,
Yeah.
sometimes it's a person that we sort of, maybe the correct word here is we become codependent on. I guess
Mm.
it is possible, is it not, to become codependent on a substance?
Yeah, well, it's it's the
Yeah,
same brain patterns that get us addicted to heroin and get us really wanting the person that we're in love with to love us back.
yeah.
So we're kind of vulnerable that way. We're
Well,
vulnerable as humans to being changed and augmented by behaviors, substances, and people because we're so incredibly relational, and we form relationships with people, and we form relationships with substances, and we form relationships with behaviors where we're like, okay, this is part of my brain. When you drive a car, your brain thinks the car is part of your body. That's why when you get a odd shaped rental car, you're more likely to, ding it up or run into something because your brain doesn't know the shape of the rental car yet. It hasn't
yeah.
integrated it as part of your body. But our addictions
Interesting.
become a part of our brain. Our behavioral addictions, like playing video games or shopping, become a part of our brain. Our brain doesn't really know the difference between us and other things and people. So, one of the things you're talking about with codependency is the experience of somebody else kind of becoming a part of us, but that person who's becoming a part of us has difficulties, usually trauma based difficulties. And then we're left trying to solve problems for two people. That's generally the codependency pattern, is that we're often sucked into a relationship with somebody who's trying to deal with trauma and has addictions, and then we're trying to compensate for both of us in this world of addiction, which is, it's a really big trauma pattern. And when somebody else has an addiction, usually then we need another source of resource for us instead of it just being us and the addict. If it's just us and the addict, we're screwed. We need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing in the sense that, well, you could have all those other voices in your head,
Yeah.
but that's a whole nother subject for another time. I want to ask you in all of this about this process that you have come up with in terms of our resonant self. Each one of us has our own individual resonance, right? It's unique to us.
Yeah.
And we can actually change that resonance, can't we?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah, we can start to be warm and understanding with ourselves. That's changing the resonance right away.
have you experienced, I'd like to think that you have, but maybe as you've been doing the program, it hasn't, I don't know if it's really been that noticeable. Have there been those moments
Yeah.
when you've realized, oh, I just changed my tone, my resonance?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I work with it when I'm waking up in the morning. I'm like, okay, because waking up in the morning has just sort of classically been a hard time for me. So what happens if I wake up in the morning and I'm really warm and compassionate with and understanding with my grumpiness or my lack of desire to get out of bed? What happens then? If I'm just like so kind to Sarah, it quite changes everything. I have also had the experience in dreams of being in a nightmare and having my resonating self witness come and change everything. Like being present to my terror, providing support and safety, creating protection, um, giving empathy to the bad guy or the bad monster in my dream and having them shrink into something, completely sort of small and cuddly and not so scary. So there's so many ways in which we are changed as we go. Very unexpected ways. The cello in the background is one of those unexpected gifts. I always
Oh,
wanted to play the cello, and I turned 50, and I was like, huh, I could play the cello. I'm going to be terrible at it, but I'm 50 years old, so nobody's going to care.
and yet, on the other hand, you could be real good at it.
Yeah, I'm not, but I could be.
Well,
But I love it. I During the pandemic, I started to take cello lessons almost every day. And the cello, like all music, it just becomes more and more complex. I've been working on the E minor scale here, and it's kicking my butt. So yeah.
well, I have done something I'm going to share with you and our listeners that um, I started back in probably June of 2021. And I'll share that in just a moment, but reminding you, you are listening to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here with Sarah Peyton, and she has a website, sarahpeyton.com, and she has a program that I think you'll be quite interested in, Your Resonant Self. There's a workbook. It is from Self-Sabotage to Self-Care. That's the workbook, and the book is guided meditations and exercises to engage your brain's capacity for healing. And I want to talk about healing too, but before we do that, I want to share something with you that I think has changed my resonance, and I've actually been much more conscious of it, probably so, than I would have imagined. I wrote, for the first time in my life, I wrote a song. And this song that I wrote is based upon the words that came from someone very near and dear to me, and used to reach over and rub my shoulder or my arm and say, "You're a good man."
Mm.
Then, in a different state, would say some pretty awful things.
Oh dear.
But I took that first experience, especially considering where I am today, and I took that line and basically I said, I'm a good man. This is what I was told. This is what I believe, not because I was told it, but it certainly helped to reinforce it. And I'm doing the best I can. I'm a good man doing the best I can.
Mm.
And then going back to my parents, where I'm going is where I'm coming from. Where I come from is the teachings, the training, the raising up that my parents did of me to be the kind of person I am today. Now, are my words and my actions, is all of that quote unquote perfect? Maybe not. Not everybody's going to like it, but that's too bad. But I'm still a good man. I'm just doing the best I can.
Mm.
And what I have noticed is an awareness that when I am in that particular frame of mind of recognizing that I am a good man, and that's not an egotistical thing. I'm not saying it egotistically. I do believe that maybe it was Anne Frank who basically said that she believed that everybody was had a good spot in them. They were good at heart. And so if that's the case, then I'm good at heart and I'm a good man doing the best I can without repeating that too many times. But what it was doing for me was it was opening up this space. And let's talk a little bit about this in terms of the work you're doing, the resonance work that you're doing. There's a line in the song, in the verse, one of the verses that talks about, when I am in touch with that, I feel like I can fly. I feel free. I can breathe.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Let's talk a little bit about that in terms of the work that you do to help others to really breathe and feel alive. And as we like to say here, no more survival. We're not going to
Yeah.
survive anymore. We're going to thrive.
Oh. Yeah, as we clear the trauma, and the workbook and the first book both have a lot of support in working with somebody else or working with yourself in journaling processes to clear the trauma away. As you clear the trauma, what's happening is what Ruth Lanius's work showed us: the default mode starts to shift, and we start to have access to our whole brain. We start to have access to our creativity, to our intuition, and there is a great space that opens for emergence, for the unexpected to evolve. I always say we really don't know who we are until we feel safe in the world. And if we don't feel safe in the world, it's not true, it's trauma. And if we're mean to ourselves, it's not true, it's trauma. And as we start to get used to those ideas and track back what needs to be worked with, which is a very simple process that's really based on intrusive memory and tracking intrusive memory, then we start to discover, oh my God, I am a much bigger person. I'm more expansive. I'm more infinite than I ever thought. I do have 86 billion neurons after all. No one could characterize me or buttonhole me or put me in a box. I am an infinite being.
You know, that is one of the phrases that I came in touch with, the phrase about being safe, feeling safe. And a lot of times, you may not be speaking ill of self, okay? Someone else may be. And you know that you need to get away from that person, that situation, and you don't.
Yeah.
And am I correct that that would be a form of sabotage?
It is. It's a form of self-sabotage. Yes.
And sometimes you have to make that hard decision. It's like when I knew that I was going to have to make this decision one day, okay? I knew that I was,
Yeah.
but I also knew that I didn't want to.
Right.
It's like my still small voice, I refer to as my friend,
Mm-hmm.
was saying, look, you need to prepare. And somebody else had said that externally. You need to prepare for this decision. So I did. I actually prepared. And when the time came to make that decision, I chose to make it regardless of the ramifications to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that we find the hardest because we get, and again, maybe the correct word here is we become codependent on the situation or the person or the
Mm-hmm.
substance.
Mm-hmm.
We're in our comfort zone, if you will. Oh, I can't do this because, where will I lay my head tonight?
Mm-hmm.
What will I do about food and clothing and so forth? And then I have to remind them, do you remember what it says in the Bible? Jesus basically was watching the birds. He says, do you see these birds flying around? Look at the trees behind me. I don't know if there are any birds there, but they don't work. They don't toil, and yet they're cared for. How much more will you be cared for? Okay? You're a child. If I may quote this poem, you are a child of the universe, no
Mm-hmm.
less than the trees and the stars.
Mm-hmm.
You have a right to be here. You remember Desiderata?
Mm-hmm.
It was a big, big hit back in the 70s, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about getting, if you have to make that hard decision and you're struggling back and forth, how can one sort of feel more at ease? Because when I did actually do it, I actually felt very good. For the first 3 or 4 days, I did. I felt in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. Let's
Oh, I'm
talk
so
about that a little
glad.
bit.
Yeah. Well, I was just working with somebody the other day who was doing a time travel to a younger part of themselves. And they said, this younger part of myself is just so happy and everything. And they just believe everything their parent is telling them. They're not dissatisfied at all. And I was thinking, I wonder why we're time traveling. And then so I was like making just resonant guesses for what it was like for the young part of them. And then all of a sudden they said, do you know what? There's another part of myself that I have pushed away that is screaming. And this part of myself that is screaming knows what's true. And so I believe that there is a way that as we do this self connection work, as you did this self connection work, we start to be able to hear the part of ourself that is screaming. There's a part of ourself that's fully committed to the situation that may not be very good for us. But there's another part of ourselves that's screaming for something better for us or for our children. And when we begin to listen to that, it makes the movement much easier.
One of the other wise sayings that I heard, I will share with you, reminding our listeners this is Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, along with Sarah Peyton, and sarahpeyton.com is the website. We encourage you to go there and get a copy. Get your own copy, okay? I'm sorry, you can't borrow mine. Your Resonant Self, be kind of hard because I don't know where you people are, and I'm here, and well, anyway. Get a copy of Your Resonant Self, both the workbook and the text, and just have some fun with it. And that's another thing too is that we'll talk about as well as having some fun with this work because there are going to be times, if I'm not mistaken, Sarah, where I don't want to deal with the shadow side today. I really don't. And I know that's part of who I am. We all have it. Is there a time when we reach a place working with the trauma where, if we have in the past over this particular trauma, we can finally say, you know what? I don't feel guilty anymore.
Hmm.
I don't feel guilty anymore. I'm okay.
Yeah.
That was not, that was me but it's not me now. I
No.
was 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, whatever it was. I'm 61, so I can probably go back maybe to my
Yeah.
20s or 30s.
Right. Me too.
That was me then. This is me now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a beautiful thing to begin to distinguish because part of what's happening is the amygdala, the part that has the emotional memory, does not have any sense of time.
Mm.
So it doesn't, the amygdala by itself doesn't know that I'm 58, doesn't know that you're 61. It thinks we're still three. And then
Mm.
that's because it's not in the places where we have the trauma memories, it's not integrated with the rest of the brain. So as we start to be warm with our traumatized selves, new integration happens and the amygdala can be reached in those areas. And we go, oh, heck, I'm not 3 years old. That was then. This is now. Yeah. And that's fun. And our sense of play emerges. And we don't have to be in the darkness all the time. And sometimes it's really good to just step in there and grab ourself that had to live through the darkness and pull them out of there so that they can be in the light too and get to be with us and be warmly held and responded to and get to play and have fun.
It's also very interesting how everybody else seems to think they know what's best for us,
Yeah.
or they know us better than we know ourselves. And I would have to say that there might even be some truth to that second statement, especially if you haven't spent any time getting to know who you are. You've kind
Yeah.
of shut those areas of your life down because you don't want to deal with them,
Or
and
you haven't been safe enough to
or you
know who
haven't
you
been
are.
safe enough.
We need to have this sense of emotional safety and a little bit of predictability before we get to know who we really are. We don't get to know ourselves. Neurobiologically, we don't get to know the part of our what happens to us when our nervous system is relaxed and feels safe.
And that's interesting. That again, we go back to that aspect of feeling safe, and it's different for every single person. You may not be physically abused. You may not be mentally abused. You might be emotionally abused and/or spiritually abused.
Mm-hmm.
But it's different for every single person. And one of the conclusions that I've come to, Sarah, is that we all experience exactly the same emotions. That's
That's
what
true.
makes us the same. What
Mm-hmm.
makes us unique is our stories.
Yeah.
How do you encourage and get people to open up and share their stories? I would assume that there is a certain level of confidentiality within the realms of working with people so that they can feel safe with
Yeah.
you because I've been through therapy. I've been
Yeah.
I went to one that was suggested by my former wife and her best friend. I went to 4 sessions. I also never paid her
Oh
because
dear.
of the fact that she used the phrase, "Richard, you have character flaws." She
Oh.
had a problem with the fact that majority of the people that I mentioned who were friends were mostly women,
Mm.
and I'm going. I realize you're not supposed to necessarily take my side. I get that. But those, to me, for
I
me,
like it. Yeah, I like
that
it
was
when our support
attacking. That
people.
was attacking.
Well, I like it when our support people are on our side. The people who study with me, this is one of the things we work with is like, am I an ally and an advocate?
Yeah,
And if I'm not, what do I need to do so that I can become an ally and an advocate?
yeah.
It's been so nice to talk with you, Richard. Thank you.
I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I thank you so much for being with us here on Tell Me Your Story: New Paradigms for a New World. We're talking today with Sarah Peyton. I beg your pardon, Sarah Peyton, and she is with us here on the program talking about the work she's doing with Your Resonance. Resonant Self, I should say. It's Your
Self
Resonant
resonance is
Self.
great too.
What's that?
Self resonance is wonderful.
Absolutely. I encourage people to get a copy of both the workbook and as well as the, I want to say textbook. I guess there's a certain truth that, but also you also have an opportunity for people to sort of get a sneak peek if they go to your website, and
Yeah.
then they go to the Sarah Peyton books link on the page, and you can get a sneak peek and free gifts from your Resonant Self Workbook. We encourage you to go there. We'll be linked to your website as well. I do
Oh,
have
thank
three
you.
final questions that I ask
Oh,
all of
good.
my guests, and I would
Okay.
like to ask you these three questions, if
Sure.
I may. But before I do, I need to tell you thank you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story. It's here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. for our special edition of Tell Me Your Story. It's podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, many other locations, as well as that link to listen live at richarddugan.com. We also ask you to go to YouTube where you can watch these interviews and you can see us and see our interactions, as well as Sarah's cat, who, Mumu?
Momo.
Momo. Okay. And hope Momo is doing well as well. And we hope that you will also find it in your heart to support us financially. If you can do so, we have a PayPal account for your security as well as ours. And if you can do that, when you go to send any size contribution, it'll ask you for the email address of the receiver, yours truly, and that would be richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. We also hope that you will participate in the decade of perfect vision, spending the time
Mm.
listening to that still small voice, spending that time in that quiet, peaceful place, just relaxing, and most importantly, feeling safe.
Hmm.
That is a great place to feel safe. I hope that you'll do that. And with that, my first of three questions. Who is Sarah Peyton?
I am an infinite being who loves learning about the brain.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you're doing now?
I hope for as many people as possible to begin to make their brains good places to live.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
Hmm. I think my life's purpose is healing.
Well, Sarah, I want to thank you again for joining us on the program. It's been a great pleasure to get to know you and to talk to you about the work you're doing through the books that you have available to our listeners and our viewers, Your Resonant Self. There is the workbook. You also have an app, am I correct?
Oh, the meditations are on Insight Timer. I think that's as close as we get to an app. You can get them on Insight Timer or on the website.
Okay, very good. And I would encourage you folks to check into that. Again, I thank you so much for joining us, and I thank you for listening and watching. Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal.